it's one of the commonest reasons that a woman will go and see her doctor, whether her GP or her gynecologist. And studies suggest that one out of 20 women, just think about that number, 1 out of 20 women have heavy menstrual bleeding for one cause or the other. So yeah, we have different types of periods. Some women have lighter bleeds than others, but there is a particular instance where any woman will experience heavy menstrual bleeding, and then it's just too much. So some examples, some scenarios that we would say this is heavy menstrual bleeding are, for example, if you're flooding every day with your pads and your towels getting soaked literally within an hour, literally within minutes, you're flooded. That flooded means you've lost so much blood that your pads or tampons are soaked within an hour, within minutes. That's heavy menstrual bleeding. Another scenario is if you're passing very heavy or very large blood clots. Now, blood clots, that fleshy, dark colored material that you see if you're bleeding heavily, tells us that you're losing a lot of blood very quickly. So for you to have large clots coming down from the vagina, from the private area, says there's a lot of bleeding that's going on to cause or to form those clots. So that is another clue that you're having very heavy bleeding. You shouldn't have large clots that are as big as grapes or as big as oranges. That is not normal. So if you're experiencing those, whether on the first day or second or whatever day of the period, and it's going on persistently, that's a reason to visit your doctor. Okay. Number 3 scenario, if you have periods that last over 7 days and they're very heavy. So heavy could be any of what I've mentioned already. You're flooding or you're soaking your pads quite a lot, and within 2-3 hours the pads are soaked, and you're doing that every day and it's going on for more than 7 days. That's heavy. That's quite a lot. And it's good to see your doctor. Another scenario is if you're having bleeding, and that applies to number 1 where I talked about flooding and heavy periods. That means that you change your pads or tampons every hour. Another scenario is if you're having bleeding, and that applies to number 1 where I talked about flooding and heavy periods. That means that you change your pads or tampons every hour. If you're bleeding and it's soaking through to your outer clothes, or soaking through and staining the bedding or the chairs or whatever, that is heavy bleeding. So you've got on a pad, or you're having to wear or double or triple your pads because of your flow. That is heavy bleeding, and I suggest that you should come and sit down and talk to us about that degree of bleeding if you're experiencing it. And another thing that could indicate that your bleeding pattern is normal, because we'll talk about it a bit later. Some people might have heavy bleeding for when they first started their periods, and they become used to it. They think this is it. They may have spoken to somebody, their mom or an older aunt or sister, and this is what happens. Women have to bear with it, and they haven't come to the doctor, but they're experiencing tiredness, very tired. They're fatigued. Any little thing, they're tired, they're exhausted. And that seems to be getting worse over time, or they're experiencing shortness of breath. That is a clue to possible anemia. Big red flag. Please come and sit and talk to us if you're experiencing any of those scenarios.